The sound of the slap echoed through Betty's roadside diner like a gunshot, silencing every conversation, stopping every fork halfway to every mouth. Margaret Chen, a 72-year-old widow with silver hair and kind eyes, crumpled to the checkered linoleum floor, her groceries spilling from reusable bags around her like scattered memories. The man standing over her laughed. Derek Mason, owner of Mason's Auto Body, and the closest thing to a local crime boss that the small town of Pineville, Oregon had ever seen, looked around the diner with a satisfied smirk. His two associates, thugs in expensive leather jackets that couldn't hide what they really were, chuckled on cue. "Stay out of my business, old woman," Derek said loudly, making sure everyone heard. "This is my town, my rules. You don't like it? Leave." The entire diner, 23 customers, 3 waitresses, and a cook visible through the kitchen window, just watched. Frozen. Too afraid to help. Too afraid to even move. Derek Mason had that effect on people. For 5 years, he'd run Pineville like his personal kingdom through intimidation, strategic violence, and carefully placed bribes to the right people. But Derek Mason had just made the worst mistake of his life. He had no idea that Margaret Chen's son was Marcus Reaper Chen, president of the Hells Angels Oregon chapter. And Marcus was about to walk through that door. Before we continue, tell us where you're watching from. And if you believe in justice, please subscribe to Bike Diaries for more stories that remind us good still exists in this world. Let's go back 3 hours to understand how we got here. Margaret Chen had moved to Pineville 2 years ago after her husband David passed away from cancer. She'd chosen this small Oregon town specifically for its peace, its beauty, its promise of a quiet retirement away from the chaos of Portland where she'd raised her son. The little house she'd bought on Maple Street was perfect. A garden for her roses, a porch for her morning coffee, neighbors who waved. What she didn't know was that Derek Mason had been systematically buying up property in Pineville, including the entire block where her house sat. He had plans, big plans, to demolish the old part of town and replace it with luxury condos, a shopping complex, a casino. He'd already bought out or forced out everyone else on Maple Street, everyone except Margaret Chen. The offers had started friendly enough. 10,000 above market value. Then 20, then 30. Margaret had politely declined each time. This was her home. David had helped her pick it out in his final months. She'd planted those roses with his encouragement. She wasn't selling. Not for any price. That's when the pressure started. Her car was keyed. Trash appeared on her lawn. Someone spray-painted her fence. She reported it to Sheriff Dawson, who took her report with a bored expression and did exactly nothing. She didn't know that Dawson was on Mason's. Payroll had been for years. This morning, Margaret had finally decided to confront Derek Mason directly. She'd asked around, learned he had coffee at Betty's Diner every Tuesday morning, conducting his business from a corner booth like some two-bit mob boss. She'd walked there with her head high, carrying groceries from the market, planning to speak to him calmly, reasonably, adult to adult. "Mr. Mason," she'd said, approaching his booth with genuine politeness. "I'm Margaret Chen. I believe you've been trying to purchase my home." Derek had looked up from his phone, his expression shifting from annoyed to amused. "The holdout from Maple Street. Finally come to your senses?" "I came to ask you to stop vandalizing my property," Margaret said firmly. "I'm not selling. It's my home. But there's no reason we can't be civil neighbors." That's when Derek's expression had turned ugly. He'd stood up slowly, his considerable bulk making the booth creak. "Civil? You think this is about being civil? Lady, I own this town. I own the sheriff. I own the mayor. I own the bank that holds the mortgage on this diner." He gestured around. "You're a nobody trying to stop progress, and I'm done being patient." "That doesn't give you the right to..." And that's when he'd slapped her. Hard. The kind of slap meant to hurt, to humiliate, to make a point to everyone watching. Now Margaret lay on the floor, her cheek already swelling, her glasses broken, her bags of groceries creating a pathetic still life around her. A can of soup rolled slowly under a nearby table. Nobody moved to help her. Everyone knew what happened to people who crossed Derek Mason. The bell above the diner door chimed. Marcus Chen stepped inside, and the atmosphere in the room shifted like a pressure drop before a storm. He was 42 years old, built like a man who'd spent his life lifting motorcycles and throwing punches when necessary. His leather vest bore the distinctive Hell's Angels patch, along with numerous others that told a story of 25 years in the club, chapters across 3 states, respect earned in ways that didn't need explanation. He'd been driving through Pineville on his way to visit his mother when he'd gotten a text from his cousin Sarah, who worked as a waitress at Betty's. "Your mom just got hit. Mason, she's on the floor. Nobody helping. Please hurry." Marcus's eyes scanned the diner in 2 seconds. He saw his mother on the floor. He saw Derek Mason standing over her, still laughing. He saw the fear in everyone's faces. He understood everything instantly. "Mom," he said quietly, walking toward her. His voice was calm, but everyone in that diner felt the leashed violence in it. Derek turned, his smirk fading slightly as he took in the Hell's Angels patch, the muscled frame, the face that showed absolutely no fear. "This your son? The biker?" He tried to sound confident, but something in Marcus's eyes made him take an involuntary step back. Marcus ignored him completely. He knelt beside his mother, helping her sit up gently. "Are you okay? Did he hurt you badly?" Margaret touched her swollen cheek, tears in her eyes, not from pain, but from the humiliation, the helplessness. "I'm okay, honey. I just wanted to talk to him. I didn't—" "Shh," Marcus said softly, helping her to her feet. He guided her to a booth, had a waitress, his cousin Sarah, bring ice wrapped in a clean towel. Only after his mother was seated, after he'd checked to make sure nothing was broken, did he turn his full attention to Derek Mason. "You hit my mother," Marcus said. It wasn't a question. Derek recovered his bravado, puffing out his chest. "Your mother stuck her nose where it doesn't belong. In my town, that has consequences. Maybe you should teach her some manners, or I'll—" He never finished the sentence. Marcus's phone was already out. He pressed a single contact. "Church." It rang once. "Yeah, boss?" The voice on the other end was gravelly, alert. "Red alert. Betty's Diner, Pineville, full club, now." "How many?" "All of them." Marcus ended the call and looked at Derek Mason with something that wasn't quite a smile. "You have about 15 minutes before my brothers arrive. I suggest you use that time wisely. If you believe bullies should face justice, hit that subscribe button for Bike Diaries. These stories matter because they remind us that good people still stand up to evil. Derek Mason was not a stupid man. He'd built his little empire through cunning, knowing when to push and when to back off. But he'd never been challenged like this before. His fist clenched, his jaw tightened, and his pride made a decision his brain would regret. "You threatening me? In my town? I'll have Sheriff Dawson arrest you before your biker trash even—" Marcus's laugh was cold. "Sheriff Dawson? Who's been taking your bribes for 5 years? The same Sheriff Dawson who's currently being investigated by the FBI for corruption? That Sheriff Dawson?" Derek's face went pale. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" Marcus pulled out his phone again, showed Derek a screenshot of a news article. "FBI launches investigation into rural Oregon law enforcement corruption." The article was dated 3 days ago. "Turns out when you run your mouth in bars about owning the local sheriff, people notice. People talk. Federal people. The sound started then, distant at first. A low rumble that grew louder, became thunder, became the earth itself shaking. Through the diner windows, they watched as motorcycles appeared. First 5, then 10, then 20, then they kept coming. 40 Hells Angels members pulled into the parking lot of Betty's Diner, their bikes forming a perfect semicircle facing the entrance. They didn't rush in, they didn't need to. They simply sat on their bikes, engines rumbling, arms crossed, waiting. It was the most intimidating sight Pineville had ever seen. Marcus looked at Derek. 15 minutes. I was generous. Actually took 12. Derek Mason, for the first time in 5 years, felt real fear. His 2 associates had quietly moved toward the back exit, abandoning him. The other diner customers were filming everything on their phones, the intimidation that had kept them silent now evaporating in the face of an even greater power. "What do you want?" Derek asked, his voice no longer booming, no longer confident. "Justice," Marcus said simply. "See, Derek, you've been running this town like you own it, but you made a mistake. You hurt someone who's under my protection. You hurt my mother, and I don't let that go." Outside, more vehicles arrived, but these weren't motorcycles. These were unmarked black SUVs. FBI. They'd been waiting for exactly this kind of situation, a moment when Derek Mason's control slipped, when witnesses would finally talk. Marcus had made a call before the red alert to an FBI agent he'd cooperated with years ago on an unrelated case. The agent had been very interested to learn that Derek Mason was currently assaulting elderly women in public. Might be good leverage for their investigation. 2 agents in dark suits entered the diner. The lead agent, a woman named Torres, walked straight to Derek Mason. "Mr. Mason, we'd like to have a conversation with you about your business practices, your relationship with Sheriff Dawson, and several allegations of extortion, bribery, and assault." "I want my lawyer," Derek managed to say. "Of course," Agent Torres smiled. "You're going to need one." As they led Derek out in handcuffs, Marcus sat down across from his mother. The diner had erupted in excited chatter, people finally free to express their shock, their satisfaction, their relief. Margaret looked at her son with tears in her eyes. "I didn't want you involved in this. I didn't want—" "Mom," Marcus said gently, "I'm always involved when it comes to you. That's not negotiable." Outside, the Hells Angels hadn't moved. They sat on their bikes, a wall of solidarity, making sure the FBI could work without interference, making sure Derek Mason's associates didn't try anything stupid, making sure the entire town understood that Margaret Chen was now officially untouchable. But the story doesn't end there. This is about more than one bully getting arrested. Over the next 3 weeks, Pineville underwent a transformation. The FBI investigation into Sheriff Dawson revealed a network of corruption that went deep. Bribes, evidence tampering, intimidation of witnesses. The sheriff was arrested. The mayor, who'd been approving Derek's zoning changes in exchange for campaign contributions, resigned. 2 city council members followed. Derek Mason, facing multiple federal charges, made a deal. He gave up everything. Names, bank accounts, evidence of every dirty deal he'd ever made. In exchange for a reduced sentence, he surrendered all his property holdings in Pineville, which were seized by the federal government and sold at fair market value to residents who'd been forced out. Margaret's house on Maple Street? Derek had forged documents claiming she'd agreed to sell. Those documents were thrown out. Her property was secure. More than that, she became a local hero, the woman who'd stood up to the town tyrant. But Marcus didn't want the story to end with punishment. He wanted redemption. He wanted rebuilding. He called another meeting at Betty's Diner 3 weeks after the arrest. This time, it wasn't fear that filled the room. It was hope. The Hells Angels were there again. But now they weren't an intimidating presence. They were volunteer labor. My brothers and I, Marcus announced to the packed diner, are going to spend the next month in Pineville. We're going to repair every property Derek Mason vandalized. We're going to help every business he tried to shut down. We're going to rebuild what he tried to destroy. No charge. This is what community means. And they did exactly that. For 30 days, 40 Hells Angels members became Pineville's construction crew. They repaired Margaret's fence, repainted houses, fixed broken windows, replanted gardens. They worked from dawn to dusk, their presence transforming from feared to celebrated. The diner, where it all started, became the headquarters. Betty herself donated meals for the workers. Other residents brought tools, supplies, their own labor. The town that had been fractured by fear became united by purpose. A local college student named Jake, who'd been filming the original confrontation on his phone, edited together a documentary-style video of everything: the slap, the arrival of the bikers, the FBI arrest, the reconstruction. He posted it on YouTube with the title, "How a Biker Gang Saved Our Town." The video went viral. 10 million views in a week. National news picked it up. The Hells Angels, often misunderstood and stigmatized, were suddenly heroes. Don't forget to subscribe to Bike Diaries and share this story. Let's show the world that respect, loyalty, and justice still matter. Marcus gave an interview to a national news outlet. The interviewer asked him, "Why did you do all this? The repairs, the volunteer work? Your mother was safe, Mason was arrested, why stay?" Marcus's answer was simple. "Because my mother chose this place as her home, because these people were suffering, because we could help. That's what the patch means." He touched the Hells Angels emblem on his vest. It's not about intimidation. It's about brotherhood. It's about standing up for people who can't stand up for themselves. My mother raised me to protect the weak and challenge the powerful. Derek Mason was powerful. These people were weak. The math was simple. 6 months later, Pineville held a ceremony. They renamed the park Margaret Chen Memorial Park, not because she'd died, but because she'd lived, because she'd stood firm, because her courage had sparked a revolution. At the ceremony, Margaret gave a short speech, Marcus standing beside her. "I came to this town for peace," she said, her voice clear and strong. "I found fear instead. But I also found something else. I found that good people exist everywhere, waiting for someone to stand up first. I stood up. My son stood up. And then you all stood up together. That's the real story, not the violence, not the arrests. The real story is a community that remembered how to be brave." The Hells Angels were given a special commendation from the new sheriff, a woman named Catherine Wells, who'd been brought in specifically to clean house. She presented Marcus with a plaque that read, "To the Hells Angels Oregon chapter, for service above self, for protection of the innocent, and for reminding us that heroes wear many different patches. Derek Mason served 18 months in federal prison. When he was released, he was a changed man. Prison, losing everything, facing the consequences of his actions. It had broken something in him, broken the arrogance, the cruelty. He returned to Pineville not as a conqueror, but as a penitent." He went directly to Margaret's house on Maple Street. Marcus answered the door, his expression unreadable. "I'm not here to make excuses," Derek said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm here to apologize. What I did to your mother, what I did to this town, there's no justification. I was a monster. I'm sorry." Marcus didn't respond immediately. He looked at this man who'd terrorized his mother, who'd run a town through fear, and saw something he hadn't expected. Genuine remorse. "Come in," Marcus said finally. Margaret sat in her living room, the same room where she'd cried after the vandalism, after the intimidation, after the slap. Derek Mason walked in and immediately knelt on the floor in front of her, unable to meet her eyes. "Mrs. Chen, His voice broke. I hit you. I hurt you. I made you afraid in your own home. I'm sorry. I know that's not enough. I know I can't take it back. But I'm sorry. Margaret looked at this man who'd caused her such pain. She thought about her husband, David, who'd always believed in redemption, always believed people could change. She thought about her son, Marcus, who'd shown her that strength and compassion weren't opposites. Mr. Mason, she said quietly, I forgive you. Derek looked up, shocked. But, Margaret continued, her voice firm, forgiveness doesn't erase consequences. You hurt a lot of people. You have a lot of work to do to make amends. Saying sorry to me is just the beginning. Derek nodded, tears streaming down his face. I know. I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to be better. I've enrolled in anger management. I'm working with a therapist. I got a job at a warehouse. Honest work, minimum wage. I'm starting over. Marcus walked Derek to the door. Before he left, Derek turned back. Thank you, he said, for not killing me when you had every right to, for giving me a chance to become a better person. Marcus's expression softened slightly. Everyone deserves a chance to change. Whether you take it or waste it, that's up to you. 2 years later, Derek Mason was assistant manager at that warehouse. He'd remarried, a woman who'd known him at his worst and chose to believe in his best. He volunteered every weekend at a domestic violence shelter, teaching anger management classes, sharing his story as a warning and a hope. He'd become what he'd once terrorized, a man trying to make amends. Margaret still lived on Maple Street. Her garden was now the most beautiful on the block. She'd started a neighborhood watch program, not the kind that polices people, but the kind that builds community. Every Thursday, neighbors gathered at her house for coffee and conversation. Marcus visited every month, always arriving with his Hells Angels brothers, always staying for a week to help with various community projects. The relationship between the town and the club had evolved into something unique. Mutual respect, mutual support. The documentary Jake had made was eventually picked up by Netflix, expanded into a full series about small-town corruption and unlikely heroes. Margaret and Marcus were interviewed extensively. The series won awards, but more importantly, it changed how people viewed motorcycle clubs, how they understood that criminal and hero weren't always opposite categories. Tell us in the comments. Do you believe in second chances? Do you think Derek Mason deserved redemption? Your thoughts matter to us. Betty's Diner, where it all started, became something of a pilgrimage site. People traveled from across the country to eat at the booth where Marcus had made his call, to see the spot where 40 Hells Angels had assembled, to meet Margaret, who still came in every Tuesday for coffee. Betty herself framed the checkered linoleum tile where Margaret had fallen, replacing it but keeping the original as a reminder. Above it hung a plaque, the spot where courage met consequence and a community remembered how to fight back. On the 5th anniversary of the incident, Pineville held a celebration. The town had gone from being ruled by fear to being known for resilience. The FBI investigation cleaned out corruption at every level. New businesses opened. Property values rose, fairly and honestly. The town had transformed. At the ceremony in Margaret Chen Memorial Park, Marcus gave a speech that would be remembered for years. 5 years ago, a bully hit my mother in a diner. He thought he was showing power. But power isn't in intimidation. It's in protection. It's in 40 brothers dropping everything to ride because one of our mothers needed us. That's power. That's brotherhood. That's what these patches mean. The crowd erupted in applause. The Hells Angels stood in silence, hands over hearts. Margaret, tears in her eyes but smiling with pride, told a reporter later, I came here for peace and found war instead. But through that war, we found something better. We found justice, community, and courage. When good people stand together, Bullies lose, corruption fails, and small towns rise again. When asked what message she had for others facing corruption, she said, "Stand up, speak out, find your Marcus, or be your own. Be the one who says, 'Enough is enough.'" That's how change happens, not through heroes, but through ordinary people who refuse to stay silent. That clip went viral. "Enough is enough" became a national rallying cry. At 77, Margaret became an unexpected activist, speaking at town halls, writing a book, inspiring thousands. Her book, The Slap That Changed Everything, became a bestseller. Every dollar went to the David Chen Foundation for Small-Town Integrity, named after her late husband, helping communities fight corruption. Marcus remained president of the Oregon Hells Angels, but his mission changed. He became a bridge between bikers and law enforcement, teaching that respect works both ways, that understanding prevents violence. And Derek Mason, the man who started it all, became one of the foundation's most dedicated volunteers. He gave up everything in restitution: his property, his wealth, his pride. What he gained was real respect, earned through real change. He traveled with Margaret, sharing his story and warning others not to walk the same path. Together, they became a living example of what justice could be when it sought restoration instead of revenge. 10 years later, Betty's Diner held a reunion. Everyone was invited. 23 customers, 3 waitresses, 1 cook, 40 angels, Agent Torres, even Derek Mason. They came not to relive trauma, but to celebrate transformation. The diner had been rebuilt into a community hub. Photos lined the walls. Marcus and his brothers building homes, Margaret speaking at schools, Derek teaching classes, Pineville thriving again. Betty, now in her 70s, stood to give a toast. 10 years ago, violence walked through my door, but so did courage and brotherhood. This diner stopped being just a place to eat. It became a symbol that no one's too broken to change. Here's to Margaret, who stood firm, to Marcus, who stood up, and yes, to Derek, who stood back up after falling. The room erupted in tears and applause. They all knew the truth. The best stories aren't about revenge, they're about redemption. In her final interview, Margaret said, "That slap woke up a town. It brought my son, it exposed corruption, it even saved a man's soul. Sometimes God uses pain to bring purpose. That slap hurt, but the healing that followed was beautiful." Derek's words closed the documentary. "I deserve to be destroyed, but I was rebuilt. Margaret showed me strength through forgiveness. Marcus showed me power through restraint. They saved my soul. I live every day trying to be worthy of that gift." The last scene showed Pineville today. Children laughing in Margaret Chen Memorial Park, businesses thriving, and every Tuesday, a group of Hells Angels quietly watching over the town from their usual table at Betty's Diner. Marcus and Margaret sat on her porch, looking at the street where it all began. "Worth it?" Marcus asked. Margaret smiled, touching her cheek where the slap had landed. "Every bit of it," she said. "Every single bit." The screen faded to black. This story is for everyone who's ever stood up when it was easier to stay down, who's ever protected someone when it was safer to look away, and who's ever believed that people can change. Heroes wear many patches. Sometimes they're leather. If you believe in redemption, brotherhood, and standing up for what's right, subscribe to Bike Diaries, like this video, and share it with someone who needs to be reminded that good still exists in this world.